a mountain footpath after rain. A woman in her mid-40s stands holding a long, thin stick, prodding at slippery stones underfoot. She's come to visit an old friend who lives deeper into the mountains, past the last village. Her hair is tied back with a red bandana, and water beads on her dark coat. Beside her, a small child, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, struggles with his sandals, trying to keep up. His name is Jiro, and he's carrying a small wooden box wrapped in cloth. Raindrops cling to the leaves overhead, dripping onto moss-covered stones that glisten like emeralds. "Jiro," she calls softly over her shoulder, "put your box down. You'll lose it." "No, Mama," he says, clutching his little package tighter. The woman stops and waits for him to catch up. They reach a narrow bridge spanning the stream. Water rushes underneath them with barely contained energy. Jiro looks hesitant as they near the edge. She stretches out her hand, but he shies away, still gripping the box. "Jump when I do," she says gently. He nods and follows without hesitation as she steps onto the wooden planks. Together, they cross slowly, careful to place each foot exactly where it needs to be. On the far side, Jiro clutches his bundle close while the woman brushes dirt from her skirt. They continue along the path until a thick fog begins to roll in from the direction of the mountains, swallowing the trees and hiding them from view. The woman peers ahead into the mist but doesn't stop walking. She leads with purpose, though the child's steps grow heavier now. "Mama," he says after a while, his voice wavering. "Yes?" "We lost the way." She smiles without turning around. "We didn't lose it, we're still on the path." The fog thickens, blurring the ground beneath their feet. Jiro starts to cry softly. "Let's rest here for a moment," she suggests gently, finding an open spot and sitting down with him beside her. She takes his hand and pulls out some food from her pack, a dried fish, rice cakes. She offers him half of everything but saves the smallest piece for herself. Jiro nibbles quietly on his snack while she watches him eat. The rain has stopped now. Only a damp wind blows through the trees occasionally, rustling leaves and sending shivers down Jiro's spine. After some time, he looks up at her with wet eyes. "Why are we going to visit Auntie Omi?" "She misses us," the woman replies simply. "But she'll be happy even if we don't come." He ponders this, staring off into the dense fog that hides everything except what's right before them. True, his mother agrees after a moment. But some things are worth doing anyway. Jiro nods slowly and wipes at his face with the back of his hand. She pulls out another cloth wrapped around her waist and hands it to him. He dries himself off and stuffs it into the box he carries. They walk on for hours more, until eventually the path leads them down a hillside to a small house surrounded by overgrown wildflowers and ferns. Smoke drifts lazily from its thatched roof. Jiro's aunt meets them at the door with wide arms open for hugs. "Come in," she says warmly, but before they do, the woman stops and turns back out into the fog one last time. "Are you ready?" Jiro nods, his eyes fixed on Auntie Omi behind them. His mother smiles, then reaches down to take his box from him. He lets go of it without hesitation. "Now," she says softly, and he walks forward, stepping through the door with both women looking after him, one in the fog and one inside her home.
You're listening to the Empty Teahouse. The door closed softly, leaving only the sound of distant dripping water. Sunlight trickled through gaps in the earth-toned bricks as morning faded into afternoon.
In the quiet alley between two clay walls of an ancient town, sunlight trickled through gaps in the earth-toned bricks, casting long shadows. Here, At midday, when most others had returned to their homes for rest or meals, a man walked slowly, his steps soft on the worn stones beneath his feet. The man's name was Tikau. He carried a small bundle of books and wore faded clothes that told stories of travel and wear. Behind him loomed the city with its clamor. Before him lay a simpler life he hoped would be different this time around. As he reached an intersection where two alleys met, he paused to catch his breath. A faint breeze carried the scent of cooked rice from nearby windows, mingling with the more distant aroma of fallen leaves and old paper. Suddenly, from the other alley came the sound of shuffling feet, someone else moving through this quiet space. Emerging was an elderly woman, her steps slow but sure. She wore a simple gray robe over a cotton kimono, and she held in one hand a small cloth bag. Her gaze met Tikau's as they halted, neither speaking for a moment. Tikau felt an inexplicable pull to assist this woman who seemed familiar yet unknown. He offered her his arm gently, saying softly, "Let me help you across." She smiled at him, a warm expression that softened the lines on her face. Without a word of refusal or acceptance, she placed her hand lightly on his forearm and allowed herself to be guided. Together they moved through the narrow passage. Tikau's hand supported hers as if it were no more than a feather against the wind. The woman said nothing during their short journey across the crossing point, but maintained eye contact with Tikau, as though reading something unspoken in him. Once safely on the other side, she paused and turned to face him fully for the first time since they had met. Her smile broadened slightly, more confident now. She reached into her bag and drew out a small square of fabric wrapped around an object, a piece of pottery perhaps, or something similarly fragile and cherished. Placing this carefully back into the bag, she took another item, a single white feather. The feather was dry and clean, having clearly been tended to with care. As Tikau watched, surprised by her actions but respectful of whatever ritual they represented, she extended it towards him. Tikau hesitated for only a moment, then accepted the feather, feeling its lightness in his palm. He looked down at this simple token, wondering if there was more behind its offering than met the eye. The woman's eyes held gratitude, not pity or judgment. Then with a nod, she turned and walked slowly away from him along her own path back into the town's labyrinthine depths. Left alone again in the alley, Tikau touched his fingers to where hers had rested on his arm just moments ago, a place that now felt warmer than the rest of his skin. The feather still held tightly in his hand. He continued walking towards his destination, no longer feeling like a stranger in this quiet world.
The feather trembled slightly in the breeze that stirred between the clay walls. A winter night was thick with fog as Jean sat at his noodle stall under a flickering lantern.
The winter night was thick with fog as Jean sat at his noodle stall under a flickering lantern. He ladled steaming broth into bowls and watched hands reach for chopsticks. Across the narrow street, a man leaned against the wall of the old tea shop, eyes closed. Jean felt the chill in his bones but ignored it, tending to the noodles as they bobbed and swirled. The steam rose and curled like smoke from an incense stick, lingering just above the tabletops. After a while, the man moved closer, pushing through the vapor that hung heavy over the stall. "Hot soup," he said by way of greeting, holding out a bowl. Jean nodded, spooned noodles into it without a word, then filled the bowl with broth. The man took it slowly to a nearby table and sipped quietly, staring down at his meal as if mesmerized by its steam. Jean returned inside to heat more water for the next customer. His hands moved deftly, accustomed to this routine after years of operation. Outside, he heard a soft clink as porcelain met wood. The man had placed something on the table beside him. Jean peeked out and saw it was an empty teacup with intricate designs along its rim. He went back outside, wiping his hands clean against a towel, and set another bowl in front of the stranger. This one was garnished with scallions and dried fish flakes. The man nodded again as he ate, his eyes still fixed downward. After finishing, he pushed the empty bowl aside and reached for Jin's hand, holding it briefly before releasing. Then he rose silently from his chair, picked up the teacup, and walked away into the night. Jin watched him go until only a faint shadow remained against the foggy backdrop. As Jin cleared the table, his fingers brushed lightly over the lip of the cup left behind. It was cool to touch yet warm with remembrance. He looked out at the silent street beyond, where everything seemed suspended in mist and calm reflection.
The lantern flame flickered low, casting long shadows that danced along the wooden tabletops. The fog hung low over the fishing dock at dawn, muffling sounds and blurring edges.
The fog hung low over the fishing dock at dawn, muffling sounds and blurring edges. Lena, a weaver with stiff fingers from years of tying knots and threading looms, sat on an overturned bucket by the water's edge. Her hands rested in her lap, their motionless stiffness contrasting sharply against the constant movement of her thoughts. Today was not the day she would mend her son's old fishing net. It was too damp for that. She watched as the fishermen prepared their boats with a sense of quiet longing. A knock on an empty plank caught her attention. Standing beside her bucket, Lena looked out and saw the traveling musician leaning against the wooden railing, his guitar case open but empty at his side. His clothes were dusty, and he carried himself like someone who had walked long distances without rest. She did not know him well but nodded in greeting. "Good morning," he said softly, taking a seat next to her. "What brings you here so early?" Lena asked, not quite sure why she was curious. "I should ask you the same," he replied with a small smile. "Just passing through on my way to another village. I heard there might be someone who can mend my guitar strings." She looked at his instrument in silence for a moment before nodding towards her own hands and shrugging helplessly. She had once been known for her nimble fingers, but now they often betrayed her. "Perhaps you could play something instead," Lena suggested after a while. "Maybe just one song to clear the air." He looked down at his guitar case, then back up at her. His eyes seemed to hold more than just curiosity. There was an unspoken request in them. "Sure," he said, kneeling beside it and pulling out his instrument carefully. He tuned it quietly, testing each string with a soft note that carried across the still water. The fog did little to muffle the sound of the music as he began to play a simple melody. It was gentle, like a whisper from another world. Lena listened intently, feeling something stir within her chest. For a long time, she had struggled against the weariness of her hands and the emptiness left by her son's absence. But in that moment, with only the music as company, there seemed to be an easing of tension, a loosening of grip. When he finished playing, Lena turned slightly towards him without breaking eye contact. "Thank you," she said quietly. There was no need for words beyond that. It was enough. "Sometimes," he started, hesitating just long enough for the weight of his next sentence to settle in, "we carry burdens we don't see." She nodded again, understanding and perhaps forgiving a little more than before. The musician shifted beside her, gathering his things. He glanced at Lena one last time as if asking permission to move on. She offered no resistance. As he stood up and began walking towards the village center, Lena watched him go until the fog swallowed him whole. The sound of waves gently lapping against the dock filled the silence left behind, a constant reminder of movement, even when it was unseen. In her lap, Lena's hands stirred slightly as if reaching out in response to something unspoken between them.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again. The salt flat at low tide stretched endlessly before them, cracked and pale in the fading light.
The salt flat at low tide stretched endlessly before them, cracked and pale in the fading light. Maria stood still, watching as her brother Louis scooped up a handful of mud from the shallow water pool between the cracks. He brought it close to his face, tilting it under the setting sun like an offering. "Feels soft," he said softly, his voice muffled by the grains clinging to his skin. Maria nodded, her eyes narrowing as she scanned their surroundings. The flat was a vast expanse of white and gray, punctuated only by clusters of dried seaweed tossed haphazardly around them. She glanced back at Louis, who wiped the mud from his hands on his shirt tails before turning to face her. "We should leave soon," she said simply. "It's getting dark." Louis nodded but did not move right away. Instead, he walked over to a small stack of driftwood gathered nearby and began arranging it into a neat little pile by each log's width. "Got something special in mind?" Maria asked after a moment. "Just thinking," Louis replied without looking up from his work. "About home." Maria watched him for a while longer before joining him, helping to straighten the wood's edges so they aligned perfectly. They worked quietly, adding logs until the pile resembled a miniature house or perhaps just a quiet shrine in this desolate place. Once satisfied with their effort, Louis sat back on his heels and looked up at her. Maria noticed how the afternoon light had tinted his hair to almost silver around the temples, drawing out years she knew were not there. "Ready," he said finally, standing and brushing off his pants. Hand in hand, they retraced their steps along the salt flat's hard crust until it gave way to the more familiar landscape of their hometown. The air felt cooler now as dusk settled over them like a light blanket. Back at the edge of town, Louis stopped and pulled out a small packet from his pocket, unwrapping it to reveal several dried fish and 2 pieces of fruit, likely leftovers from some evening meal shared earlier in the week. They divided their meager fare between them, eating slowly as if savoring each bite's texture and taste. "Thank you," Louis said after swallowing a piece of fruit, looking over at Maria who was still chewing thoughtfully. Maria nodded, her gaze drifting back toward where they'd been on the salt flat. A faint breeze ruffled through nearby shrubs, carrying with it an odd scent that neither could place but seemed to belong only to this moment, unique and fleeting. "Ready," she finally said, echoing his earlier words. Together, under a sky beginning to darken, they started walking toward home without another word, each step measured and deliberate.
The salt-crusted soles of their shoes crunched softly with each step they took. Shadows lengthened as the day drew to a close, carrying whispers of stories untold yet felt deeply. The empty tea house rests. Until tomorrow.